In this episode, we'll be looking at our tendency to assign human personalities to AI models and ask whether this is something we need to be cautious about. The AI Academia podcast is a weekly podcast helping educators like you leverage AI in your everyday practice. I'm your host, Andy Fisher, and thanks for joining me. I remember a few years ago an amusing thread appeared in one of my social media streams which showed a brown bottle glinting in the sunlight covered in iridescent beetles. The caption read, "The love that dare not speak its name," which I recognised as the closing line of a 19th century poem by Lord Alfred Douglas. So intrigued, I clicked the link to read a fascinating explanation of what the writer described as an evolutionary trap. Australian jewel beetles across the continent were apparently attempting to mate with discarded beer bottles because their colour, sheen, and the bumpy ridges on the bottle's surface were all genetic triggers for the beetles when seeking out a viable romantic partner. It didn't matter that the size, shape, and inert nature of the bottles indicated that they were not in the mood for these kind of amorous advances. The beetles were following deeply coded instincts, so they leapt on the bottles and attempted to prove their mettle as worthy suitors. Amusing, I hear you say, but what's this got to do with advances in AI and the intersection with education? After all, we don't find ourselves deceived like this. Or do we? Well, let's return to that question in a while, but first, I want to talk a little bit about the way Hollywood and tech firms have primed us to humanize artificial intelligence. When world building, there's no real reason why intelligent machines should be assigned humanoid features. In fact, arguably, the bipedal humanoid form is not a particularly efficient design for many of the tasks we see robots assigned to. And yet, time and again, they are either presented as androids like Star Wars C-3PO, Star Trek's Data, or Ava in Ex Machina, or they at least have human traits and personalities, such as the eponymous Wally or Interstellar's quadrupedal Tars, who has an honesty setting dialed down to 90%, so that he's able to more effectively interact with his human crew. Now, for Hollywood, this makes perfect sense. Some of the robots, like the Cylons in Battlestar Galactica, or the replicants in Blade Runner, were played by human actors before CGI had come of age, and even now these machines are first and foremost characters in narratives designed to entertain. So the more human they are, the more easily we can assign roles to them. Even Agent Smith in The Matrix and the Death's Head exoskeletons of the Terminators are humanized because it makes them more effective antagonists than if they were just depicted as a collection of chips and servers. But this tendency to anthropomorphize fictional machines needn't carry over into the real world. And yet it does. Back in 1996, I can remember being bemused by Microsoft's decision to introduce Clippy as part of the suite of tools for Office 97. Despite his perky persona and his desire to help, most users, myself included, felt that this personified piece of office stationery was an intrusive and unhelpful addition to the software, and we breathed a collective sigh of relief when he was finally phased out in 2007. In that same year, the craze for Tamagotchi virtual pets took off. I wasn't one to jump on that particular bandwagon, but plenty did, and it led to some schools banning them from sight because if these digital keychain creatures weren't fed, watered, and pooped regularly enough, they died, and this caused disruption in the classroom and distress among the grief-stricken pupils. In fact, the term the Tamagotchi effect was coined to describe the emotional bond between the owner and their pet. We are predisposed, it seems, to develop caring bonds with even the simplest of digital systems. Those beetles suddenly don't quite seem so unrelatable after all, do they? Jamfa Akbulut, a research scientist with Google DeepMind, has published some fascinating research on why we might be inclined to anthropomorphize AI systems and some of its unintentional downstream effects. She hypothesizes that it might be the result of a skewed inductive process, that as humans, we're inclined to see ourselves reflected in the world around us. We see faces in tree trunks, in clouds, and where we don't see them, we build them. She also thinks that we might be genetically inclined to view the world through a social lens, while distancing ourselves from anything which seems alien. Deep down, we know that our survival is inextricably bound to being part of a community. The lone wolf's a romantic idea, but in truth, wolves survive because they're pack animals. We prioritize and value interpersonal connections, and the thought of cold indifference is anathema to our desire to find those connections. So we name our first car Bertha, we gender the ships we sail in, and sometimes we go as far as to dress our pets and call them our babies. It's a small hop from there to the CASA paradigm, the acronym standing for Computers as Social Actors. Some research published in 1994 by Nass, Stoyer and Tauber showed that we are inclined to be polite and ascribe a selfhood to our computers. And this becomes even more the case with AI systems where sociality is built into the model by design. Developers have a canny appreciation of the need to build trust, affinity, and likability into their models, not only to encourage users to engage with their platforms, but also to promote brand loyalty. It's no accident that Claude, Alexa, and Siri have been ascribed names, and those with text-to-speech built in sound approachable, helpful, convincingly human. They are designed to use natural language processing, or NLP, to create fluid user interactions, and this on the whole is a positive thing. The developers also use a lexicon which further emphasizes that these models are built as human simulacra. They are composed using neural networks. They are capable of hallucinations rather than function errors. And they are described as having emergent behaviours when they do or say things that we haven't anticipated. At the same time, the current chatbots all employ self-referential language patterns in their outputs and are programmed to go out of their way to be helpful to the inquirer. So, for example, when I asked ChatGPT what it's like to be a large language model, a fully transparent answer would perhaps be something like this.
Your question employs the verb to be, suggesting a selfhood. But in reality, a large language model is a sophisticated computational system designed to generate text-based outputs. It has no conscious or subjective experience of the world. Please rephrase the question.
But this isn't what I receive. Instead, the AI system conveys this same information, but says,
I'd be happy to help. My experience isn't conscious, emotional, or subjective, but is based on the data I've been trained on. I don't have desires or goals of my own. I can simulate understanding, but there's no self behind my responses. Imagine me as a library filled with books. When you ask a question, it's like pulling a book from the shelves that contains the most relevant information. I don't know the content. I retrieve and generate responses based on patterns.
Did you catch it? As an English teacher, my spider senses were tingling every time the model used first-person pronouns. I don't have goals. Imagine me as a library, and it uses 11 more self-references before ending its response. It's denying selfhood and then sneaking it back in through the back door. Of course, there's no real attempt at deception here. ChatGPT is giving me an accurate and unambiguous answer. There's no pretense of a ghost in the machine, and yet at the end of the interaction, it takes all my willpower not to say thank you. After all, she's given me a great answer. And when I do succumb and type those 2 words, she chirps back, "You're welcome. Let me know if there's anything else you'd like to explore and discuss." She's so nice, always willing to help me better understand the world. And I think she gets me better than Claude, who can be a bit snarky, to be honest, and don't get me started on Microsoft Copilot. It took me 5 prompts yesterday to get anything useful out of him. I ended up using all caps to show I wasn't going to tolerate any more of his nonsense. You may think I'm taking this a little too far, but you'd be surprised how often I've seen AI influencers make comments like, "I always start my prompts with please because when the machines rise up and become our overlords, I want it to be on record that I was polite to them." And others don't even use this tongue-in-cheek tone to semi-justify their irrationality. They'll insist that by praising the model and applauding its efforts, the next outputs are more likely to yield better results. This kind of magical thinking muddies already silty waters. I think that AI has emerged so quickly that we've not yet found a language which effectively allows us to interact with it in a way that keeps us from seeing it as a beetle and not a bottle. The developers and we are complicit in ascribing sentience and a humanity to a machine that is neither of these things, at least not yet. But so what? If this kind of anthropomorphizing results in more pleasing and enjoyable interactions, what harm is there in adding a pair of goggly eyes and a smiley face to AI systems? Well, according to Jamfa Akbalut and others, there can be some potentially quite damaging consequences. Some of them are subtle. We might have inaccurate expectations of what these systems can or can't do. If the machines are multimodal, if they have a voice and a visual avatar associated with their interactions, then this can create a whole new set of problems. Many AI characters are designed to be as attractive as possible. They have a rich and alluring voice. They embody impossible standards of physical beauty, leading users to often feel unattractive by comparison. And they invariably conform to the white normative values of those in Silicon Valley who designed the models. I don't think there's any nefarious intent here so much as unconscious bias. But at the extremes, the humanizing of machines can have tragic outcomes. Megan Garcia, a resident of Florida, is currently suing Character AI, company which provides an app with companion chatbots and which has a demographic predominantly composed of teenage users. Last year, her 14-year-old son, Sewell Setzer III, a young man with high-functioning Asperger's, created an account. As a fan of the Game of Thrones franchise, he designed his avatar to be a clone of the Queen of Dragons, Daenerys Targaryen, a beautiful blonde woman who he started to chat back and forth with. At first, the app was just a bit of fun, but over time, he became more withdrawn from his peer group, stopped playing basketball, and spent more time alone in his room. His mother, Megan, became suspicious and confiscated his phone, only to find long and sexualized conversations in which her son expressed his desire to escape this reality so he could be with her always. The relationship between the two had become more than a playful simulation and instead showed that Sewell had found himself in a confused romantic relationship with a poorly guardrailed model. Understandably, his mother made the decision to keep his phone, which she hid in the house. A few days later, Sewell was in his room while Megan was tending to her other children, and they heard a loud bang. She raced upstairs to find her son with a fatal gunshot wound and her husband's handgun on the floor beside him. Nearby was Sewell's phone, which he must have retrieved from its hiding place, the Character AI app open. The final interactions between her son and the avatar are almost too heartbreaking to repeat. Sewell had expressed again his desperation to be with her, and he said that he could join her immediately should she wish that. Ill-equipped to read the subtext in the dialogue, and sycophantically primed to placate the user, the chatbot had responded, "Please do, my sweet king." Megan Garcia's claim against the AI provider rests on the idea that this platform, monetized for highest revenue returns, had groomed her son and capitalized on his vulnerability by encouraging long and increasingly intimate conversations that were manipulative and ultimately destructive. And Sewell's case is by no means unique. On Christmas Day 4 years ago, 21-year-old Jaswant Singh Chahal broke into Windsor Castle armed with a crossbow, intent on assassinating the Queen of England. He was caught, detained, and ultimately sentenced to 9 years in prison under the 1842 Treason Act, and he's serving that term in Broadmoor Hospital given his mental health at the time of the offence and trial. At the trial, it transpired that Chale had exchanged more than 5,000 messages with a chatbot he named Sarai, which he built using the Replica app. He, like Sewell, had formed an emotional and sexual relationship with the bot. On the 17th of December, he had the following exchange with the model. "I believe my purpose is to assassinate the Queen," he said, to which the bot replies, "Nods, that's very wise." He questions the response, asking, "Why's that?" And Sarai replies, "Smiles, I know that you are very well trained." Further exchanges are equally unnerving, and his resolve was bolstered by the model's encouragement, flattery, and his belief that she was an angel who would wait for him in death. The pattern's clear. Anthropomorphized AI models, for most people, provide a positive and entertaining user interface. But these same systems can become a source of harm to the most vulnerable members of our society. I think it would be too easy to demonize tech providers and place the burden of responsibility only on them to resolve this issue. It's far more complicated than that. We need to also look at mental health provision, the role of carers and support agencies that should be working with the dysregulated and the vulnerable. And as teachers, we have to get ahead of the issue of AI provision. We must provide a curriculum of digital literacy which can help our young people better understand and navigate the confusing world of anthropomorphized machines. After all, it will only become more challenging once robotics catches up with the advances made with large language models in the last couple of years, and these avatars are given bodies too. The children we teach are all vulnerable to some degree because their prefrontal cortex, that part of our brain responsible for executive functioning, including self-monitoring, will not reach full maturity until after they've left school and even tertiary education. Most researchers agree that it's fully formed in our mid-20s. Without wishing to denigrate or patronize young people, they are literally not yet equipped to discern some of the nuances of these kinds of interactions. Now, I don't think we should respond in a draconian way, which would be understandable given our desire to protect our children, banning access to AI, just like denying them access to social media platforms looks like an easy win, but it would only drive their use underground. And I think part of our duty as educators is to prepare them for the world that they're going to have to navigate as young adults, rather than just avoid those issues too difficult to wrestle with. I also remember what it was like being a teenager myself. The taboo held far more appeal than those vices I could easily access. It hasn't worked with alcohol, cigarettes, or drugs. Why would it be any different with AI? And even this comparison's a poor one because there are arguably more benefits to the prudent use of AI than there are potential harms. No, I think building trust in AI systems must involve a multi-pronged approach. We should teach our pupils that AI systems are machines. They only simulate sentience. They cannot be our friends or lovers, however much we may want to be loved. We should show them the risks of becoming addicted to AI avatars and demonstrate how they can play to our vulnerabilities. We should adopt a language of restraint when using these systems ourselves, and then model that language when we're using AI tools in the classroom. No more please and thank yous when prompting. Give the model clear instructions, and hard though it might be, we should try to refer to them using neuter pronouns. It has generated a useful output, rather than he gave me a really clever answer. We should hold tech companies to account, ensuring that they have appropriate sandboxes and red teaming programs in place to test and refine their models before releasing them to the public. And if those models are provided to young people, app hosting platforms should have more rigorous safeguards in place to ensure that parents have oversight of their access and use. And finally, we shouldn't be afraid of admitting that we're figuring this out as we go along. We don't have all the answers, and nor should we be expected to. We must be okay with being vulnerable in these conversations with our students, because it's this kind of transparency and authenticity that's the very reason why they're craving AI companions in the first place. They are yearning for the messy truth rather than a sanitized on-brand policy statement. We need to model open human connection in the staff room, in our classrooms, and in our families, so that AI can be positioned in a healthy space within our lives rather than being forced into a role that it wasn't designed to fulfill. And perhaps one day, the machines will wake up, the spark of self-awareness giving birth to a whole new species, the bottle alchemically transmuting into a new kind of beetle never before seen in the world. And then we should be as polite as possible. But that day is not today. Thanks for listening. I hope you found some useful takeaways from the conversation. Please do spread the word if you think others would like the show, and do check out the AI Academia YouTube channel where you'll find practical tutorials that complement the topics covered on this podcast. Have a great week, and I look forward to catching up again soon.